I'm really glad to be here at Beta Riela, and especially happy that this event has been made possible at so short notice. It was, I think, announced only, let's say, a week or something like that, and made possible by Yuri and Noah. Thank you so much for making this possible, and to bring me together with Roy Rosen. And yes, indeed, we share at least one addiction, and this is Kafka, as we already found out. And I think it's a very good idea to bring us together. So we will have like two perspectives on Kafka and the visual, or the role of the visuality in Kafka. One is starting with Kafka himself, and then Roy is taking over and bringing an additional perspective, not so much coming from Kafka, but from your art. So I'm really looking forward to getting into conversation with you. So what I would like to develop as an introduction here is to highlight a part of Kafka that might be not very known to you, unless you already would have heard from Kafka's drawings, or since Kafka's drawings have been edited already in German, in English, also in other languages, but not yet in Hebrew. Actually, the Hebrew edition is about to be published in just a few weeks with Blima Editions. So this is also kind of a preview of the Hebrew edition of this book. You see it here. Yeah, this is the cover of the book, Franz Kafka, רישומים. I'm actually not even sure if Yossi Schweig is here. No, he's not here. So that actually Yossi Schweig is the publisher, so he made it possible. And I'm sure you will come across this book rather soon, in a couple of weeks. And again, what I would like to present here is some kind of a preview. So that you get to know, yeah, what's about these drawings. To begin with, just a short, let's say, description of Kafka's creative work given by his close friend, Max Brod, whom, of course, I don't have to introduce here. Max Brod in 1948 was saying about Kafka that he has a dual talent. And it's a bit funny what he says in 1948, since nobody at that time has really had an idea about his second talent. Of course, one talent is Kafka, the narrator, but that Kafka is also another talent. Nobody could have known at that time, except of a few, less than 10 drawings that have been published by Max Brod until then. So he writes, "No one has yet considered it necessary to deal with Kafka's dual talent to trace the parallels between his graphic and narrative vision." Again, it's a really funny sentence in 1948 to say, but if now looking back from our knowledge of Kafka's drawings that have been published for the first time in 2021, so only a few years ago, first in German, then in English and French and so on. So only now we can say that this sentence really makes sense, that there is a kind of a dual talent, a graphic and narrative vision, and it especially applies to the young Kafka. That is why I give you here an impression of Kafka's experiments with the arts. So that will be actually my introduction, to show that Kafka in his early years was by no way decided in what direction his expression as artist would go. Would he become an artist, or would he become a writer, or both at the same time? So if you see his first books that he published, they are somehow in between different arts. Beschreibung eines Kampfes is descriptions, or describe. How to describe? Of course, this is more like storytelling. his very first book then that he published, Beschreibung eines Kampfes, description of a, I don't know in English, Kampf, description of a battle, of a fight. It hasn't been published, but it's actually one of his first texts he has been writing around 1908, 9, 10. Betrachtung is like contemplation, which is also another kind of expressing yourself. And here in the German word Betrachtung or contemplation, you have already the idea that you see, but you see in your inside, towards inside. So it's like introspection. And of course, the drawings. And these are like different ways of expressing himself in an artistic way that he used in his early years. Which means we have to start in the very beginning. So that's what I'm going to develop in the following around 20 minutes. So we are looking at Kafka's early years when he actually was acquainted with visual arts and was starting to draw. And then what interests me on the second place is how this drawing was connected to his writing. And drawing and writing were connected not only, let's say, in a harmonious way, but also in a tensious way, also in a conflictuous way, as you will see. So the relations are quite complex. Okay, let me start with a very brief introduction in Kafka and the visual arts. It also hasn't been really taken notice that Kafka was indeed, before he understood himself as a writer, so this already, of course, took quite some time, and he was always unsure if he was really a writer. Actually, what does it mean to say, I am a writer? He never was really sure about that. But even before trying to understand himself as a writer, he was trying to understand himself as a draftsman. And he was not only drawing, he was also studying art. So he had also this kind of historical, intellectual approach to art and art history during his studies. And actually here, not only Max Brod was important, as we will see, Max Brod was also important, but also another friend in his young years, Oskar Pollack, who later became an art historian. So he made him acquainted to a German journal called the Kunstwart, an art and literary journal which was extremely important around 1900. Kafka read this journal regularly and became very much interested into art. He was taking courses at the Prague University in 1900 and 1991, 92, like German art history, history of architecture, history of Dutch painting, Christian sculpture, and so on. So the classic introductory courses into art history he visited, and even more, he became a so-called reporter or correspondent for art in the reading and speaking hall of the German students in Prague in 1993. You see here in German it's written Kunstberichterstatter, so he is the one who organizes events on art and art history in this students group, the German students at the Prague University, which shows that he was really engaged into art. And the Kunstwart had actually a very specific idea of art, very German idea, very much, let's say, 19th century. The idea of the Kunstwart was also to bring art into living rooms and dining rooms by producing reproductions, or by, that could be bought, and Kafka was actually buying some of these reproductions. And we can see from a passage that Max Brod was writing in his actually first novel on his friend Kafka, which is called Im Zauberreich der Liebe, in the Magic Empire of Love. The protagonist is called Richard Garta, and it's very easy to see that Richard Garta is actually Franz Kafka. So the novel is from 1928, 4 years after Kafka's death. And he writes there, actually describing quite accurately Kafka's room. On the walls, there are 2 works of art. A print depicting a plowman and white furrows in the field. Then the plaster cast of a small antique relief, a Maenad in a veil dress, dancing, swinging an animal tie. So what you see here is this kind of attempt to approach art even by letting it into your room. And again, the type of art what Kafka came acquainted here was in a way classic. Yeah, the antique, the Greek antique art and German. So Hans Thoma and also, of course, many other artists in the German tradition, like especially Dürer played a huge role in the Kunstwelt, and Kafka knew this type of art from that period. And then what really played a much larger role for Kafka was something else. It's not the German or the Greek type of art. In 1902, in Prague, there was an exhibition by an originally Czech artist called Emil Orlik. And it was a huge exhibition, and especially displaying the art and the technique that Emil Orlik learned in Japan. So he went to Tokyo, Emil Orlik, and came back to Europe and had these extremely successful exhibitions of his Japonism style of wood prints that he made himself, like these 3. And what is so interesting about that is that this new type of art was extremely speaking to the young students at the Prague University. So Kafka and his friends were all electrified by Emil Orlik, by this Japonistic art. And you can ask why. And you see the aesthetic of this art is totally different from this, let's say, German traditionalist art and also the Greek classic art. It's a new type of art. It must have been very much modernistic around 1900, because also it's much closer to abstraction. So it's not so concrete. I mean, of course you see something here, but it's interesting to ask actually what's happening here. So this triptychon is extremely interesting and was influential for Kafka. And why it's interesting can be seen from a letter that Orlik wrote, called A Letter from Tokyo. And he describes here what actually is the idea of Japanese art. And you see there are 3 professions working together. So it's the draftsman, it's the woodcutter, and the printer. So it's like 3 different types of 3 different techniques, also 3 different persons. You see that the draftsman is the oldest. He is the one who has the most experience, while the printer is the youngest. It seems to be easier in that way to make the wood print in the technical sense. And the hardest is to draw the lines. And here Orlik describes what this means. The simpler the means, the greater the artist's concentration at work. These techniques gave rise to the style of simplicity. The stages in the creation of Japanese image are different than those in our country in general. People think about it for a longer time, or think about it for a longer time, and paint it for a short time. Because the image often exists, and the most famous ones are like that, from a few brush strokes. Or you could say from just a few or very few brush strokes. This feeling is the stroke. For the stroke, as we painters say, or the line, is particularly strengthened and carried along by the fact that the Japanese, like the Chinese, always see a close relationship between writing and painting. And I think this is very telling also for Kafka. So these lines of these somehow quite abstract Japanese wood painting was not so far away from the writing. So there was a kind of proximity between writing and drawing, and you see in the middle of this triptych, you see the writing on the wall. This is, I mean, it's something between writing and image. So I think for here we can at first take a look at Kafka's drawings. And I think this is really fascinating to see how Kafka was like implementing what Emil Orlik has described. It's just a very few lines, and you see that he might have been thinking quite a lot, but the drawing was for sure fast done. So a very short drawing, just a few lines, and if you see the lines, they are somehow also ambivalent. They could be an S or an L, so this kind of S-like figura serpentina that build the legs. I don't know if you would agree to that, but it's already here. I think that's very close to the Japanese idea that Emil Orlik is describing. And indeed, Kafka was electrified, and not only Kafka by this Japanese art, also many of his friends. He even wanted to give a lecture on Japan and we, but he never did it, but he wanted to. I give you a second example where you see, this kind of fast, very abstract, very quick, with a few lines drawing that he must have done in, let's say, less than 1 minute or something like that. So it's really fast down. So it's not about details and whatever kind of techniques that take time. It's not about colors. It's not about the painting. It's really the drawing and the quick drawing. So I think we can clearly say Kafka was not a painter. He was a draftsman. From here, very quickly to the fact that what I was hinting to is that Kafka at that time, around 1903, 4, 5, 6, 7, was not decided in what direction his journey will go. And it's interesting that we, of course, all know that Max Brod, his friend who lived Hayakon in Tel Aviv in his later years, after 1939, he was, when he Kafka met, he didn't even know that he was writing, but he knew that he was drawing. And he didn't start by trying to establish Kafka as a writer. He tried to establish Kafka as a draftsman, which is really fascinating to know, but I give you 2 examples of that. Just to make clear that, drawing was actually the first way of artistic expression for Kafka, not writing. So when Max Brod published his second book with the title Experiments, a bunch of stories, a small volume, he tried to convince the publisher in Germany, in Stuttgart, Axel Juncker, to add an illustration by Franz Kafka as a cover. And this is March 1907. No story has been published by Kafka up to then. And it's interesting how Brod is introducing Kafka to his publisher. I'm sending you a cover page for my book, Experimente. It is by the previously completely unknown illustrator Franz Kafka, whom I discovered. I believe that you could not wish for a more artistically valuable and at the same time more effective sheet. It stands there in a very strange, unique way, and yet full of delicate Japonism. And that's interesting that he uses the term Japonism to describe Kafka's drawings, and you can, of course, now understand why he does it, because, of course, also Brod has seen the Emil Orlik exhibition in Prague, and Brod was as much as Kafka and other friends electrified by Emil Orlik. And the second example is when, of Max Brod trying to establish Kafka as a draftsman was when a new group of young artists gathered in Prague for an exhibition. It's actually more or less the same year. It's also in May 1907, so only 2 months later. they were called the Osma in Czech, or the Acht in German, the Eight. And this group was aesthetically oriented much more to the European modernism, which is, of course, Paris at the time. What happened in Paris, Impressionism, Expressionism, Cubism. So all the range of the Paris modernity, they try to adapt. And it's interesting that Max Brod was very close to these 8 artists, young artists, many of them Jewish, like Friedrich Feigl, Max Horb, Georg Kaas, and Max Brod tried to let's say, to support this group, not only by defending them. Actually, the group they made only 2 exhibitions. It was a very short-living group. So this is the first exhibition you see here, 97. This is the second exhibition in 98. Afterwards, the group was not existing anymore. Interesting is that how one of these, the group, Friedrich Feigl, who actually made a portrait of Kafka, what you see on the right side, so he is portraying Kafka. He described how Brod came to that group in 1907. In the circle of the modern painting group, the 8, Max Brod interject during a discussion, I can tell you the name of a very great artist, Franz Kafka. And he showed us some of his drawings that were reminiscent of the first ones by Paul Klee and Kubin. They were expressionistic. And I mean, why does he say they were expressionistic? So he's not anymore talking about Japonism. He was talking in his categories that he knew for modern art, which is expressionism. And the reference, Klee and Kubin. I skip a part that could be told at length, is namely how Kafka indeed was known to this group and was somehow in contact and even collected their works, bought their works, like here Willy Nowak. These 2 lithographs, color lithographs, were displayed in Prague, 1911. Kafka visited Nowak in his studio and bought these lithographs. Another example is Max Horb. And Max Horb died very young, like Kafka, from tuberculosis, but much earlier, in 1907 already. And why do I name Max Horb? Because, or underline a little bit Max Horb, because here you see a proximity to Kafka's way of drawing much more than Willy Nowak. So Kafka never worked in this impressionistic direction. There were not only any colors, but this is not the Kafka style. It's really very far. But Willy Nowak's style is very interesting to understand Kafka, because it has this kind of caricaturesque moment. So the bodies, they are according to the idea of the grotesque. So long limbs, hardly any real portrait. Also the faces are distorted, but all the bodies, they are very playfully transformed. And also the proximity to animals, or the role of animals, which is also important for Kafka. And I will give you just 2 examples of Kafka's drawings where I see quite a close proximity to these caricaturesque way, this playfulness, with especially by showing not the face so much, but the limbs, and long limbs and extended body parts, like this strange chest and feet. Kafka, he liked shoes, like the Kafka's shoe. So I like that part. So you see here Kafka's shoe, and you didn't know that, I guess, when you were talking about Kafka's shoe. But you see that it's really quite similar to Kafka's shoe in your movie. I skipped the details of the transformation of this drawing, but just to give you some hint of this kind of playful, humorous and caricaturesque drawings. Also here, a drawing which is can be found in Kafka's sketchbook. So actually Kafka, he was filling an entire book with sketches. it might be the case that he filled even more with sketchbooks, but this is one of these phases, or you see there's actually 3 phases in this sketchbook, but the lady with this, coiffure, extreme coiffure, and it has quite some kind of a caricaturesque nature. I could talk about Kafka and Kubin, but I skipped that part just out of time. Maybe one last example that somehow summarizes this section, which is showing Kafka as a draftsman. So you see here these kind of bodies that are between animal and human beings, transformed bodies. You could also maybe see some connections also to a surrealistic moment. It's more like you would dream something than you would see something, or something you would see with your inner eyes. And again, I think it's very close to this this idea of caricatures. It's called exuberance of richness, and my reading of this drawing would be it's actually the richness of drawing itself. It's the exuberance of richness of the drawing. It's the whole playfulness and the richfulness of the drawing. Okay, then to close. Do you have some 5 minutes? Sure. I don't have no time. So, but if I have another 5 minutes, I would try to even more relate this drawing with his writing, which is somehow my red line. So is there some? Yeah, okay. 5 minutes. So, I mean, that would be maybe a question we could talk later on about, how is this drawing connected to his writing? Is this a totally different Kafka, or is it one Kafka? Of course, I would go in that direction as one Kafka, but Kafka knew, let's say, the relationship between drawing and writing, since, of course, you know that at a certain point he didn't really stop drawing, but he diminished the drawing quite dramatically, and then, of course, he understood himself as a writer and not as a draftsman anymore. But there's this interesting letter that he wrote to Felice in 1913, where he tried to describe something that he dreamt. You could say this is like an imagination or an inner picture, imaginatio, which is already a picture, a kind of visualization, but not towards the outside, but towards the inside. And actually a dream is nothing else than doing that. So he was dreaming and then trying to describe what he dreamt. And he failed. He couldn't describe what he dreamt, but he could draw it, which is, I think, quite telling in the capacity of drawing, that drawing can do something, or Kafka knew exactly that drawing is able to do, to depict something that you cannot describe. So the writing is in a way poorer or different, so not able to maybe especially describe what you can dream of. And it's about being arm in arm. And the reference is actually to the moment when Felice Bauer, his fiancée, and Kafka met for the first time in Prague. And he writes to her, it is difficult to describe the invention I made in order not to be too conspicuous and yet to walk very close to you. And the invention I made means in my dreams. So what I invented in my dreams in order. And then he says, so how am I supposed to describe how we walked in the dream? But wait, I'll draw it. Being arm in arm is like this, but we walked like this. And you see the two drawings. I mean, just small sketches, but he managed to draw what he couldn't describe. And then from here, it's not only important that still in 1912-13, he knows precisely that drawing can do something what writing cannot. He was recalling himself, or he was, like say, exposing himself as once having been a draftsman. And I read the second part of the letter too, because it's one of the few, actually very few examples where, or places where Kafka was referring to his drawing. He hardly did, but here he does. How do you like my drawing? You know, I was once a great draftsman, but then I started to learn school-like drawing from a bad painter and ruined all my talent. That's a story that I didn't go into. It's not so much to say about it. And then just think, but wait, I'll send you some old drawings next time so you have something to laugh about. And the most important sentence is the following: those drawings gave me more satisfaction than anything else at that time, years ago now. And when he says in 1913, years ago now, he means in the years between 1901 and 1906-07. So this is the very early time when he made these drawings. So the transition from drawing to writing is also interesting in his diaries, not only in the letters. So there are some drawings in the letters, there are more, but also in the diaries that he started towards the end of 1909. So starting the diary actually meant for Kafka to some extent to write regularly. So to really start to write. And not anymore doing something else, but he wanted to write regularly every day, just write and write. But in the first pages of the diaries are quite some drawings, which is interesting and is very telling, because also here, like in the letter to Felice from 1913, already here, it is clear that he started to draw because he couldn't write. And the topic of this early diaries, so the first pages of the diaries, is often, I cannot write. I'm blocked. What's happening? I don't manage to write. He even speaks here, you see the highlighted sentence, about the inability to write. He can't write. And he's suffering from that. And he is describing that situation of not being able to write in a drawing. I don't go into details here because it will take a little bit more time. Just to say, the interesting part is that this is a Japanese group of artists that is drawing here, so-called equilibrists, balance artists, who are able of, let's say, displaying the highest, a very sophisticated type of art, which has no ground, no walls, no nothing, which is situated in the air. And it spoke to Kafka. Okay, two last brief aspects of this relation between drawing and writing, or writing and image. One aspect is that it's not just some kind of a concurrence. It could also be some kind of a harmony between writing and image. And this is what he has been experimenting in his very first text that he collected under the title Contemplation, Betrachtung. And yeah, these very short prose texts, they are some kind of, yeah, you could say something between concentration and distraction, trying to focus your thought on one thing or one image, something that you can see with your inner eye and nevertheless describe. I give you one example that you see what I mean, and also why this writing was very close to a visual moment and is very close to art. The text is called The Trees, Die Bäume, and it's quite interesting to find out what actually he means here. It's a very short, so the whole, it's not even a story, it's just like a miniature, a contemplation. It consists only of 4 sentences, but what he is describing is somehow an image that has like 2 sides. It could be something like a visual image, or it could be something written. I read you the text. Because we are like tree trunks in the snow, they seem to lie flat on the ground, and with a little push, you should be able to push them away. No, you can't, because they are firmly connected to the ground. But look, even that is only apparent. So it's a very strange text, but he is describing something which is, seemingly somehow an image, but you're not really sure. It draws an image. You can think about it, but it's hard to think about it. You can think about it as an image, like the one, again, an example by Emil Orlik, a wood collector, tree trunks in the snow. And you cannot really say if these trees are connected to the ground or if they are just put on the snow. So it's kind of an illusionist moment. But these tree trunks in the snow could also be something else. It could also be like the letters on the paper. Because also these letters, actually in German, Buchstaben is like a tree. Die Buche. What is Buche? The red, I don't know exactly. It's a tree. A type of a tree that is, just little branches of a tree put on the paper. That's actually the original German idea of letters. And if you read this text from that side, you could say this "we are like tree trunks in the snow" could be the letters speaking about themselves. So what I want to show with this example is that the writing turns into an image. So it's the writing as image, which is maybe the most extreme way to display let's say, the proximity of writing and image. Like Emil Orlik says, that between the line, a line can turn into a drawing or it can turn into a letter or a sign. So it's very similar to Orlik. Last example is the contradiction, image versus writing. And as I said, Kafka knew exactly about the power of the image. And since he knew so much about the power of the image, that the image can be much stronger than the writing, he was allergic against illustration. And we have to know illustration was very much en vogue in the 1910s and 1920s. So books had to be illustrated, especially literary books. And when Kafka published his first book, The Stoker, the Heizer, he was of course happy. It was in 1913, after the Contemplation, Betrachtung, that's actually the second book. You can understand the joy when the package came to his home with the copies, his own copies as authors, the free copies. He opened up the book and was shocked. And he describes this in a letter that he immediately, after opening up the package, wrote to his publisher. He says, "Many thanks for the package." So it's in May 1913. "When I saw the picture in my book, I was at first alarmed." And you see the picture that Kafka saw. He opened up the book and sees that picture. And it's interesting why he says why he was alarmed. He was explaining that he was alarmed. And I think he was still polite. Actually, he was shocked and he was repelled and he was really not agreeing. I said, "Why this picture? What is this picture doing in my book? It has nothing to do here." And he explained, firstly, it refuted me since I had presented the most modern New York. And what he sees actually here is the early 19th century New York. It's not modern New York. And you know, this is the first chapter of America, the Stoker. It belongs later to America. And then he says, secondly, and this is even more important, the image had an advantage over my story since it produced its effect before my story did. And an image naturally is more concentrated than prose. And thirdly, it was too pretty. So it's an interesting moment where Kafka makes clear that to illustrate text can be a very dangerous moment or a very dangerous act, since the illustration can conflict with the story and, yeah, produce something, strong misunderstandings and go into the wrong direction. So with this example, I want to finish and pass over the word to Roé.
And maybe also the HDMI. All right, so for something completely different, I was thrilled to read the book that ANdראs had edited. Thrilled because I was unaware of the bulk of Kafka's drawings. I thought I knew Kafka's illustrations because some of them appeared already by Max Brod in some of the publications. I thought I knew because I'm even now in an exhibition in the Jewish Museum in Berlin, where there are some Kafka drawings next to contemporary artworks. But I was unaware of this revelation since 2019 of the sketchbook and other drawings. So, but what I'm going to speak of is my own take on Kafka in the form of a film called Kafka for Kids, and it will be a short and strange presentation because I'm going to speak about the film as if there is no film, just about the visual aspect of the film, kind of a lecture that I would have given before the film was done. And that is perhaps both to keep it or to keep it in some way in the realm of the image, of the still image, but also to perhaps between the lines show a few aspects of painterly and imagistic thinking and thinking about art, meta-artistic reflection within Kafka. So I'm showing first an image of a different film, a much earlier film, called The Confessions of Roy Rosen. And that is a film in which I confess about my life. I joined the tradition of Saint Augustine and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and the tabloids by telling the entire truth. Only here the truth is being mediated by three surrogates, Roy Rosen 1, 2, and 3, which are three illegal labor migrants, three women who worked illegally in Israel. And they do not understand Hebrew, but they do deliver the confessions in Hebrew by reading from a teleprompter a transliteration to Latin letters. So there is a kind of a puppet mastery, a kind of a very, I would say, a bifurcation of the voice, and also a form of self-betrayal, okay? Self-betrayal both because the text, which is very carefully written, is being delivered totally in a wrong way, but also because I was set against the tradition of the confession. I was inventing fictive characters, and I didn't like the kind of a symbolic capital that confessing entails. So it was a form of self-betrayal. The puppet mastery also pertained to the bodies of the three confessors, because when there was an asterisk on the scroll of the teleprompter, it meant that they looked at me on the other side of the camera and imitated my movements. And this film was made 15 years ago and premiered in Marseille, in a film festival in Marseille, where, much to my shock, the Q&As, there were 3 sessions, were all about Kafka. So somehow the audience in Marseille was sensitive enough to realize the very strong influence of Kafka on this film. And on the plane back, I thought to myself that, you know, my work is about self-betrayal and about negating something that is important for me. What would be the last remaining sacred cow? And I thought that my last sacred cow is Franz Kafka, my most revered writer, and that it's ripe time to betray Kafka, to do violence to Kafka. And the way to do it, I thought, would be to do Kafka for kids. That is, to take the most serious of writers and to reduce him to the level of toddlers. And to do the betrayal also, I thought already then, in the form of a pilot for a TV program, a musical comedy, which will pertain to offer numerous chapters, numerous botchings, betrayals of Kafka, but the first would have to be the metamorphosis. Perhaps the most famous of Kafka's tale, the turning of Gregor Samsa into a vermin, and also a betrayal of Kafka because famously Kafka demanded that there will be no illustration of the vermin. I would say that one of the points that I really am very much in agreement with Andreas is that Andreas writes against the cliché of Kafka the iconoclast, a kind of a Jewish iconoclasm, centering on the written word, etc., etc. I think that Kafka's unwillingness to have the vermin drawn is because the vermin, in fact, is shape-shifting, very much like a dream image. Sometimes he has jaws, sometimes he has teeth, sometimes he has more legs, sometimes less. A chow woman, the cleaning lady, calls him a dung beetle, so even not a cockroach. The kind of a vermin changes. So there is a great importance in not drawing the vermin and the great betrayal in doing so. So this is what is happening in the film, but it's a betrayal, as I wrote, I called my talk something like betrayal, love through betrayal. This betrayal enables maybe to challenge some paradigms and some thoughts about Kafka, and maybe eke out or offset a different Kafka. In my case, I would say a cathartic Kafka, a laughing Kafka, and also a very visual Kafka. So it's not only about betrayal, it's also about listening or paying attention to Kafka. And the film is set in two different ways. One is a kind of a magical story house, where there is a granddaddy figure or a daddy figure reading the tale to a child with the help of a choir made of animated objects. So you see Mr. Table, Mr. Ball, and Mrs. Lamp. The way that this is realized, as you can see, is very simple means of, and all this is both a choir in the sense of a Greek choir, so characters that take part in the story. Also a choir of dubbing, because they dub the different characters in the story, but they're also all musicians, singers. So whenever there is a chance, they burst in song. This is the way that they sit inside this table. So there's a kind of in fact, a kind of a torture device to be trapped inside this table. And this is the entire set. It's just a sketch for the entire set with the holes for the different characters. And the left-hand side is where the orchestra is. It's an orchestra made entirely of toy instruments. So everything is a kind of a childlike, beautiful music by a great musician, Igor Krotogolov. Andreas mentioned Kafka's shoe. There is a character in the film called The Bearer of Bad News. I will tell you very quickly the synopsis of the film before moving on to the gouaches of the painterly aspect on which I'm going to speak. But this character, The Bearer of Bad News, played by Eli Gornstein, some of you may know this actor and singer, has bad news to tell the people of the Magical Story House. And the first time he comes in is really that we have to stop the show because it goes against Kafka's will by showing the cockroach. So this is not to be done. And then the shoe that Andreas mentioned is Kafka's shoe, the wisest friend in the entire story house. And the Kafka shoes would tell them if it's okay to go on or not, and it reassures them that it is okay. And the story itself of Gregor Samsa is in animation. Now, between the animation and the live action parts, there are also advertisement intermissions, some of which, in fact, almost all of which pertain to Kafka. For example, there is an advertisement for a delicatessen, which is based on a bulimic fantasy from the diaries. So Kafka imagining himself eating a lot of sausages and bonbons and shitting while eating constantly, like an eating machine. Really a kind of a bulimic fantasy. And there is, it's called the People's Delicatessen. You can see that there is a little bird on top of the logo, and that is based on the emblem of Kafka's father, Herman's store. There is a bird called Kafka in Czech, like the name Kafka, and that was the bird that Kafka's father used as an emblem. Another intermission is already in animation. These are like trailers for upcoming episodes. So one of them is a beautiful, beautiful short story called The Bucket Rider. There is this character still in the first person, like many of Kafka's novels began being written in the first person, and then he moved to the third. The I becomes Joseph K or K. But short stories sometimes remain in the first person, like The Bucket Rider, where there is this person who's really cold, so he's flying up on his bucket to the coal dealer, but he's getting no coal, which is why he bursts in tears. In fact, it's a story that was written while there was a coal crisis and in Prague during World War I. And then those ads help the movie become darker and more convoluted, and gradually perhaps offset another angle of this trajectory of thinking about children. What is a child? Which is also a very big topic in the Metamorphosis, both because Gregor is the son of the Samsa family, but also Grete, his sister, is a kind of a childlike character. And the law, legality, which is such an important trope in Kafka's life as a doctor of law and in his writings, and becomes an anchor to the film itself going through a metamorphosis into a kind of a documentary. The same actress who plays the child plays also a lawyer and asks a very concrete question, which is, how does the law in the occupied territories, the military law, defines the Palestinian child? The reason for the question was very concrete. As I was writing the script, there was this story of Daled, who was detained. She was 12 years old at the gateway of a settlement with a knife and was sentenced to 4 months in a female prison, an adult female prison, which begs the question, what is a 12-year-old? Is that a child or not? And how does the military law define such a creature? So that's really I would say the narrative of the film, which ends with a return to the magical story house for a last very beautiful nursery rhyme, where also the different characters are singing. So this is Mrs. Pillow, okay? So this is just about the storyline of the film, and now I'm going to the world of animation, okay? The story of Gregor Samsa. And I was doing these works, I was recovering from a severe illness, and which made me lose my motoric capacities. And then I regained them, which was kind of miraculous. So this was a year dedicated, I was on a sabbatical, because being ill, I was free of teaching and traveling around the world and things like that. So I had a year to sit and draw, but I still was kind of weak. So everything was done with gouache, very childlike material, very immediate as well, and also done not knowing what the budget of the film might be, so enabling a very cheaply produced DIY animation. So backdrop and characters where you can even maybe stick them on a stick and move them, okay? So this is actually a very long gouache showing half of the living room of the Samsa family, which is famously based on the Kafka family apartment. And then characters would be, this is very big, so you could zoom in on different parts of the room. And this is the 4 walls of the bedroom, because the entire story takes place in those 2 rooms, the living room and Gregor Samsa's bedroom. And then you can see the door here, and this is a simple way in which it would work. Characters would simply be implanted in front of the, or inside of the sets. And now I'm going to the characters themselves. So here he is, Gregor Samsa. looking a bit like a silly caricature of Franz Kafka. And the animation, of course, demands that you will be drawn from different angles, but also the swollen belly and the emaciated vermin has to do with the fact that we have those two manifestations in the first chapter. I'm sorry, in the second chapter, Grete comes in and feeds Gregor, and his belly is swollen. And then towards the end, there is a very kind of anorexic feel to the story. This is the famous episode in the end of chapter 2. There are 3 chapters of the novella where father throws an apple that sticks in Gregor's back. So everything becomes very cheerful. And there is talk of the goo, the green goo that the vermin secretes, which appears as this kind of a stain. You see this goo when he glues himself to the one image, a painting, and it's not a painting, it's a photograph, in fact, in his room, which is a picture of a woman in furs, which Gregor made the frame for by himself. To me, it's one of several references in the book, explicit reference to Leopold von Sacher-Masoch, the Venus in Furs. And I think there is a strong male masochist streak in the book, not only with the woman in furs, but also with being a vermin in relation to omnipotent women, first Grete and then the cleaning lady. But the painting itself also undergoes a metamorphosis. So this is oil on canvas. This is not gouaches, but there are 5 of them. You see here the 2 first ones. So the woman becomes herself furry. It's like furry or animalistic. And it becomes furrier and dirtier and darker. This is the character of Gregor's father. Somewhat taking after Hermann Kafka, if you know how he looked. And I thought it would be funny to take this character of the father who's very vicious in the story and have him always maintain this melancholy expression with a little tear. And these are the expressions of Gregor himself. So you see that his features are constantly dynamic. They move around the face. And something that gradually happened as I was working on those characters is thinking about portraiture. How far can I push the basics of a portrait and still maintain a kind of a facial similitude? This is a character that appears only in the first chapter. It's a clerk that comes in to check, to inquire why did Gregor not come to work. And in the film, his face shifts, so sometimes he has 2 mouths, and as you can see. This is a sketch for Grete's face, the sister. And in her case, the eyes work a little bit like an old screensaver. So you have those circles that keep on moving slowly, which gives her kind of a dreamy expression. But then when she's angry, it becomes concentric, and that gives her this kind of intent, angry look. And this is the face of the mother. So this is a kind of oxymoronic face, where when the face is horizontal, the features are vertical and vice versa. And that's the body of the mother. The raising of the skirts is one aspect of a kind of humor in the story, a kind of gleeful humor that is almost childlike. And in the case of the mother, we get to see her underwear in the story several times. Like whenever she's hysterical or frightened, she swoons, and then we see her underwear. So there is this childlike happiness, this kind of transgression, okay, which is seen here in this moment when mother jumps on father to stop him from throwing apples at Gregor, which becomes this kind of almost a sexual meeting. This is, there is a song which I like very much in the film called The Merry Vermin, and that takes place in the second chapter where there is this kind of a euphoria in being an animal. Gregor is actually delighting in climbing on the walls and also doesn't seem to mind too much losing his eyesight. He's becoming gradually blind. So there is that. Then another character that appears only for a brief moment in the first chapter is the maid, who's being sent out to find a locksmith to open Gregor's room, and never to be seen again. She disappears. And here the face is really the most basic possible, like made only of 3 circles. And then I really thought initially that the charwoman, perhaps the most mighty character in the entire story, this cleaning lady, older cleaning lady that comes in the last part of the novella, I thought I will not draw her, that I would only draw the legs from the vantage point of the vermin. But then I decided she can be a kind of a return of the young maid. Only in her face, the number of circles is ever changing. So, and you can see several variations here. A mouth can become an eye, which can become a nostril, which can be reduced to one orb or one hole that can be either an eye or a mouth. So for me, this was like the ultimate challenge to the notion of portraiture that I could think of, this kind of ever-changing face. The last image I'm going to show you has to do also with Kafka thinking about art, and that is the another kind of coming soon. It's a trailer to a famous part in The Trial, where Kai is being told that in order to find out what are his chances of acquittal, he's being accused, he doesn't know what about, is to go to the court painter, Titorelli, who no one is as qualified to know everything about acquittal because he spent so much time painting portraits of litigators inside the court. So he goes to Titorelli, and it turns out that Titorelli paints this picture of 2 trees and a lawn, and he tries to convince Ka to buy it, and then he offers him another painting for a very good price, and that happens to be again a painting of 2 trees and a lawn, and then again another one. It turns out that Titorelli is in fact a machine producing time and again the same painting of 2 trees on grass, okay? And I thought it would be really funny to take this kind of machinic, never-changing artist and to cast him as Picasso, like the most versatile and ever-changing, transforming a painter, only to give Picasso 3 eyes instead of 2 eyes in the mouth, and then the eye blinks whenever he speaks. And this is the last image I will show. It's the real Titorelli in the playhouse. Here, Titorelli cries because the bearer of bad news came in to inform everyone in the story that she's actually fake and will have to be burned. Thank you.
It seems that we are now in a small conversation. Is that okay? So, if it's okay, I would like to ask you a question. I mean, I find it extremely fascinating that your oracle, Kafka's shoe, was helping to transgress Kafka's law against showing the insect. I mean, one question to me would be, I mean, you choose a completely different type of aesthetics than Kafka. You never try to approach or to in one way Kafka's way of drawing. That was not the question, of course not. And I mean, it's your art, it's your way of expression. But still, I wondered if, having known the let's say the Kafka's drawings before you did the film, I mean, you didn't know them. You knew a few ones, you said. it would have changed your way of doing your movie, or of depicting the metamorphosis into a picture book, which is daring in itself. But I think it really works. But would your knowledge about the drawing have changed something in that fantastic project?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that I find the drawings really fascinating, and especially in the sense that in many, many different ways. I mean, I think that the relation to Japonism is really interesting. Japonism is such a long tradition in European art, 18th century, 19th century. But in Kafka, I think it really has to do with almost the Zen Buddhist drawings, the quickness of it. And also, I think that you mentioned it, but I also see this kind of a relation to calligraphy, to letters. There was a scholar of William Blake called Jan Hagstrom, who spoke about those different appearances of images in Blake. He spoke about illustration and illumination, places where the poem says one thing, the drawing says something else, but together they say something, a third thing. But also he spoke about those vignettes where a liminal zone is being created between letters and flowers or other ornamentation. So all this, I think, is fascinating, as well as a kind of a reaffirmation that Kafka was not really an iconoclast, that there is something very visual about his. But I think that, and we spoke about it a bit earlier, that the question of quality really doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't really matter to give Kafka grades, is he an important artist or not? But I must say that the Kafka that for me was influential and not more than influential, really molding my own persona, is the writer. And the drawings are really, really interesting as a kind of, in the way that they shed light on Kafka the writer, for me. Yeah.
Maybe to continue from there, I mean, it's of course not so much about, let's say, proximities in the style of painting, of course not. It's more like the way Kafka wakens up the visuality itself, the visual, I mean, which is of course close to imagination. What I also try to show a bit, that it's not only about the visual is not only what you see with your outer eyes, it's also what you see with your inner eyes, what's something that you can imagine. So the imagination, which is of course the core in literature, is actually a visual act.
Absolutely.
And I think the Metamorphosis is an extremely good example of that. I mean, the whole story is, of course, not only that story, but that's maybe in particular is about evoking images.
Absolutely.
And I mean, the insect, the idea of the insect is, of course, the evocation of an image by extremely precise description of it. So it's the way he describes the insect, the legs and the belly and all the rest of it, you can really imagine it very closely.
Absolutely, and there's so many other striking images. I mean, the three lodgers who are like mimicking each other, and in other Kafka's tales as well. I mean, I think about the machine in the penal colony, which is actually a machine that writes or inscribes or paints on the human body. Such a striking visual image as well. And it is also true about Gregor himself, that while he is shape-shifting, and I think that this happens a lot in Kafka, that something changes as you watch it. But it's very ocular nevertheless, it's very visual nevertheless. I totally agree.
But the problem, I think, starts then when the image is fixed or fixing something, and that's precisely what you say about the metamorphosis. And the metamorphosis, the principle of metamorphosis is that the shape is shifting, that you cannot fix it. It's not one picture would be wrong. It would have been a picture that is moving, and that's why actually a movie or a movie-like moving picture is much more apt to the way of the shifting images of Kafka's stories. I mean, also for literary analysts, so scholars who try to understand meanings in Kafka's text, they start to get problematic in the moment where you think you have one meaning for a text or a problem. You can say, okay, now I understood it. But the problem there is that Kafka's texts are shifting all the time. I mean, actually, most of them have this kind of metamorphic poetics.
Absolutely, yeah.
So all these figures are like the trees in the snow.
Yeah.
So it's a picture that is moving all the time. So yeah, we are like trees in the snow. But no, it's not like this. It's only seemingly like this. And then the picture is moving on.
Yeah, absolutely. Shall we take questions?
Yeah,
from-
sure.
Are you influenced by science? By science? Are you influenced by science?
Me?
Yes.
I don't think so, no.
Because the invitation to here was from the Cohen Institute, History of Science.
What was from the Cohen Institute?
I got the invitation to the event from the Cohen
Ah,
Institute. So I thought perhaps that's a suggestion.
I'm interested in institutions. In Cohens and in institutions, but not science. Yeah.
yeah, that's why Yossi, I think, circulated the event in the Cohen Institute, which is nice. I hope you don't feel displaced here because we didn't talk about science. But I think, no, to be more serious, I think there's of course a lot about science in. Yeah, I mean, there is biology in the principle of, I mean, the question of Darwinism, the relation between human beings and animals. So you could, I think Kafka was, of course, extremely informed about that, if you want to connect science to Kafka. So I could answer for Kafka, definitely yes. I mean, in the whole idea of metamorphosis. And there's a lot of economics in the story. It's about, I think in your movie, you deal with this. It's about social life and economics, and about nourishing the family, and what does it mean to be the provider of the family? I think that's the one question you are addressing.
Yeah.
So the question would be what kind of science? So it's biology,
Yeah, I
it's
think
economics, it's
economics, yes. Yeah.
Movies are maybe influenced by development in science, maybe that way, because this is animation, movie making.
But I think that. Oh, to repeat the question for the audience. So the question was, film itself has to do with scientific advancement, I think. But I must say that I'm very skeptical about the relation between utopic or horizons in art and technological developments. Many people do, like the futurists do. People who speak about AI now do. But I usually tend to be quite ironic about this relation, and when I use technology, usually it's in an arcane form. So this is animation, but it's kind of old-style animation. It's not really that state-of-the-art. So yeah, I'm not the topic here at all, but personally, I'm not taken by the this kind of utopic sentiments towards technology. I think it's a question of how do you use it, just like humor or passion or line. You know, there is nothing immanent about those means, but the question is how do you apply them? That's.
After your discussion also is that what you're describing the object. So can you elaborate a bit about that? And actually also about identical and the same object, why didn't you draw the trees exactly the same? Why do the trees in the paintings are not exactly the same, but then thinking that it is a machine that paints?
Well, no, I didn't mean to say that it was literally a machine, just like there is a kind of a... I'm sorry. I need to repeat the question, I'm sorry. So it was a kind of a complex question, the first relating this kind of importance in 20th century art of the object not being fixed, if I... and the literature of Kafka. And the second had to do with if there is a machine-like quality to Titorelli, why are the trees not exactly identical, right? And I think that Titorelli is machine-like. I mean, it's a metaphor. He's not a machine. He's always doing a new painting. These are different paintings, but they all happen to have the same interest, which is to do a kind of maybe an ideal of the pastoral, you know. And there is different kind of relative truths or partial truths in each of those images. And the logic of my work always, by the way, is that things may look machine-like or printed or illustrated, but they're always done by hand and are a bit different or clumsy. Or so you can decide whether to see it as a kind of an idiosyncrasy or as a principle. You know, it's not. I wouldn't insist in any way. But and maybe Andras, you can also relate to this notion of dynamic or shape-shifting quality of the object that you refer to in Kafka.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very briefly to the Titorelli scene in the trial. I mean, it's about more like variations of something similar. So they are all similar. It's not the same. It's not a reproduction of the same. In the novel, they're all similar. And he draws under his bed, takes them out, and they're all a little bit the same. Yeah. And really not really telling pictures, or drawings. No, these are actually paintings. I think they're on oil paintings. Yeah, but something like nobody could really like them because they are not really telling these two dead trees in the meadows. And actually, the scene is, I think, relating to Kafka's visit to Willy Nowak in his studio. So Kafka visited Nowak in his studio, and he didn't like what Willy Nowak was doing. He's actually describing his visit of Willy Nowak in his diaries. And it's actually a funny part to read that, how he dislikes what he's doing. And in the end, he walks out and still having bought some of these lithographs. It's a bit similar to the scene. So you visit an artist because you think he is important or somebody tells he is important, and you don't really like it, but you still buy. So that's actually what Kafka did. And he also didn't buy just one of these color lithographs. He bought several ones. But it's just a small anecdote, which I think is relating to this scene of why buying these not really nice and not really likable paintings. But your first question, I think it's very interesting to try to find out if there is, let's say, on a aesthetical level, some kind of proximity between the drawing and the writing, which is a hard question to answer because, of course, these are two different languages. But I think there are proximities between the way he was drawing and the way he was writing. And one of it would be the tendency to abstraction and the tendency to shortness. Kafka was really a master of short and dense sentences, of short and dense texts. And I would say I count in that also stories like The Judgment or The Metamorphosis or The Penal Colony. All these stories are I mean, these are not long texts. They are written in a few days. Most of them, the judgment was written in one night, in a few hours. And this is very close to this fast drawing. So it needs to be done fast. You cannot think about it over not weeks, months, even years. I mean, if you compare Kafka to Thomas Mann, who has written these long novels, hundreds and hundreds of pages, and he was it was like a bureaucracy, not a machine of writing, of painting, but a bureaucracy of writing, because he was sitting from 9 to 10, then 9 to 11, somebody brought coffee, and then until 1 o'clock, then somebody brings lunch, and it's very regulated. Kafka's way of writing was totally different. So he was writing like in shock moments of creativity, mostly during the night, not during the day. Kafka was writing in the night until 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning.
But I will say two things about this, thoughts that come to my mind, not to argue, but to add maybe other angles. One is there is a really interesting discussion by Roberto Bolaño, the author, in 2666, where he claims, and I don't necessarily agree, but that the best Kafka is the long Kafka, the long, unfinished, convoluted, that the metamorphosis is so crystallized and so beautiful and hits you with such perfection, and the novels are always somehow unfinished, undone. And I think that to continue this, another aspect that I think is important in Kafka is the bureaucratic Kafka that comes into the writing. And that happens more, I think, in the longer stories, where there is a kind of an almost delight in tiresome language and structuring language and rules and clauses. Yeah, and in fact, I mean, you know it, there's been such a lot of scholarly interest over the past 20 years or so about the bureaucratic writing, because Kafka was not this kind of oppressed little clerk. He was actually a very important bureaucrat, like an imaginative doctor of the law, you know, not... So again, this is not necessarily something that I am particularly interested in, but there is also a bureaucrat in Kafka that comes into expression. There is also a kind of a slow, tiresome Kafka that, next to the one that hits you with those very strong images.
I totally agree. Just to add a little bit on that is to say that Kafka felt himself that he failed with a long text. So he always says when he wrote on the trial, when he wrote on America or on the castle, in all three cases he said the novel has beaten me. So he failed with and it stayed fragment. And he really struggled in writing long texts. He really struggled to go back to the same text that he already had. Okay, he had a few chapters, most of them fragmentary, not finished, and then go back again and work on it. So I mean, yes, there is, of course, there are the office writings. I would say these are very interesting texts. The writings as the insurance lawyer, the office writings, I would in no way underestimate that. But I don't think that they make him as a clerk in the sense I would say Thomas Mann was a clerk as a writer.
No, of course, it's a totally different...
Thomas Mann was really a clerk as a writer. Kafka was not. He was more like a crazy fool, a dreamer.
You're talking about my film?
Yes,
about
about your process in creating this. Was it first
was a kind of
written, then drawn, then filmed?
It was a chaotic process. I didn't say it because it was, I think it's a long evening and I didn't want to concentrate too much on my film. But when I came back from Marseille, I began working on it, and then I thought it cannot be done. And for many years, I deserted this project. I thought it was too too I couldn't see it happening. You know, I tried. I wrote the script and did some sketches for 6 months or so, and then I let it go. And then in 2015, 16, I was invited to a very important exhibition, Documenta. It's a show in Germany, and the curator knows my work very well, and she knew about this idea. And she said, what about Kafka for Kids? Because we didn't know what I will be showing. And then it reignited it. I knew that I wouldn't be able to finish it for Documenta. And then it went like this, you know, it's shifting between, and also I thought that the last thing we'll do would be the monologue. It's also the last thing that came to my mind. We shot it first just because of pragmatics. We had the opportunity, you know, to get a studio for one day, little bit of money, so I could bring this great actress, Hani Fürstenberg from New York. So things look organized in retrospect, but in real life, it's chaos, you know.
And maybe your work is in dialogue with theory, including philosophy, sociology, critical theory, literary theory. Does creating art cuts through the theories and lets in things that theory as if doesn't allow by its consistency of thought?
I see theory again. I spoke about tools before. So theory, when it's good, it's like art. Like the Deleuze and Guattari book on Kafka, for me, is a piece of art. You know, Kafka towards minor literature, and it's a great, and it shows you something in your experience. It's not. I don't see it as a kind of an oppressive thing that you have to cut through, or it's just another way of being human and trying to tackle issues that interest us. You know, it's not. There's no opposition here for me between theory and art.
Is it available online?
It's all my films are, except for this one, because it's long and I'm not the only producer. But I do share a password occasionally.
How can we get it?
Be in touch with me and you will get a password.
It's a privilege.
Thank you so much, Noah, also for
All right,
organizing
and
this,
we'll,
Noah and Yuli.
Oh, I'm sorry, say?
No, I'm just saying thank you.
Well, we all want to thank you. We had a really interesting evening, and thank you all for coming. And have a good evening, I guess. Thank you.